All right, thanks for joining me. I think we're live here. I was playing it on my cell phone as well, just to see if the internet connection was working well, because you can't tell from this end. And if I don't enjoy my cigars while I'm doing this, really, I almost have no time to have my cigars anymore. And as life gets more stressful and cases heat up and get litigated, you have to basically smoke cigars and drink whiskey. That's the only way to get through it with your sanity intact. So this is Freedom is Scary, episode number 55. It's hard to believe it's been 55 different times that I've ranted at my screen by myself in this room before. But I appreciate all of you guys following along, and I have something worthy of your attention this time. And two things I want to talk about. One is the science, the actual science, because I believe in science, the actual science behind my claim and others' claim that forcing our children to wear masks at school is harmful, it's misguided, it's child abuse, it's unconstitutional, and it's something that we can defeat in court. And if we can't, then we're done. We've lost the republic. It was never going to be easy to keep, but we've lost the republic if that's the case. So again, thank you for watching. Just looking at a couple of the comments. Bubba, what has science got to do with politics? Well, that's a good question. Science can be used to prove things in court, okay? Prove things in court. And science can be used to prove that all this stuff that they're saying about why masks are necessary is absolute BS. It's absolute BS. And people need to be armed with the firepower, the scientific firepower, and the legal firepower to defeat this in conversations with their family, over the dinner table or at parties, conversations with their coworkers and friends, and conversations with people who have been completely propagandized and are what I would call doomers, and drive around by themselves with their masks on. So what has science got to do with politics? Well, I think it has to do more with law, because I'm talking about law here, but it's kind of politics as well. So I saw somebody had mentioned, where is it? I should have got here early and to do some banjo picking. I actually have my banjo here. The problem is that I have rheumatoid arthritis in my fingers. They're getting better as it gets warmer, but as it progresses, it gets more difficult to play the banjo for obvious reasons. But I do have it here. Okay. My wife had this made for me. Just for a second here. It's, again, warning, it's not good. See, I'm not very good anymore, but hopefully I can fix my fingers here soon and start playing again. But there you go. There's your banjo. But that's clawhammer banjo as well, by the way. So that some might say some of these self-entitled types, these virtue signalers, they might look at me playing that banjo and they just think that screams white privilege. That they might think that's the whitest thing they've ever seen, is just somebody as white as me from the deep South playing the banjo. And I just happen to be in West Virginia. So complete and total white privilege. And just like all truths that they misunderstand, actually, me playing the banjo is an engagement in cultural diversity, because the banjo is truly a multicultural and diverse instrument. That if you look at pictures of former slaves, and I think maybe slaves, and in the very early stages of photographs in the Deep South, you'll see them playing banjos. So banjos were, this wonderful part of our history that, no matter what color your skin is, it was a part of our culture as Americans. And I didn't grow up playing the banjo in Florida, but when I moved to West Virginia and I saw people playing this banjo, but not only that, it was a different style. It wasn't like you would see with the bluegrass and, in other places that's super fast with the multi-finger picking. This was like an old style that existed, around the time of the Civil War and even before. They call it old time music, old time banjo. It's called clawhammer. And a lot of people don't know that bluegrass was actually invented, really, I think it was in the 1920s by Flatt and Scruggs, I believe. Don't quote me on that, but it's a product of the 20th century, and it's awesome. But the old style of music was on the banjo was sort of played like that. So that's kind of what I learned to play from, some people here in the mountains that took me in. So again, I'm not sure how I got talking about the banjo, but what I want to talk about here today is the science that I've been able to learn behind why masks are useless for stopping the spread of COVID-19. Because from the very beginning, many of us have known that, or we've suspected that. But we've been told and had it shoved in our face that, science. If you have you're not allowed to have your own opinion. If you do, the arrogant question that you get from these elitist types is, well, where did you get your medical degree? Or where did you go to school for virology? And things like that. So in other words, you're not allowed to have an opinion unless you're a medical doctor, or you're a virologist, or you're a leftist, or you're a liberal. And I'm not sure at what point really it became a political thing. And your question is, well, what does science have to do with politics? And maybe this is what you meant. But since when was it a requirement for liberty that you had to prove the science of anything? And obviously it wasn't. But that's just the sad reality that we're in now. Yep, Shred Zeppelin. You can't see the whole thing, but he's on a surfboard. Yes, Juliana Farrow. I feel privileged every morning to wake up in the beautiful state of West Virginia. That's absolutely right. I'm not from West Virginia. I was born in North Carolina. I grew up in Florida, in the swamps of Florida, not in any city or anything like that. I literally had an airboat parked in my backyard when I was, growing up, when I was in high school. And some kids might, like around here, go have nothing else to do but to drive into some field and drink some beers around a fire, or go to a parking lot at Walmart. I used to get in my airboat at night and strap an aircraft landing light on my head with my friends and bring a cooler and go out. And I can't believe in the middle of the night that I survived my childhood. But it was great, and I loved it. But I decided to move to West Virginia by choice. And this small town here did not that it had a choice, but agreed to adopt me, basically, or some portion of it did. And now I've raised my two kids, or almost in the process of raising my two kids here. And so they're native West Virginians. And I think that's allowed me to have more of an opinion than I otherwise really would feel entitled to. I am a Floridian, a Florida cracker, to use a term of white privilege, whose family from there did not have electricity, been there since the 1840s, didn't have electricity into my grandmother's childhood, had really no privilege whatsoever, lived in the country. And you know what? My great uncle, who was sort of my benefactor in life, Uncle Buddy, I have a picture of him, a painting of him on the wall here. He paid me through law school and all that. He was very important to me, but he was a real Florida cracker, and he grew up down there. And we brought him up here for the last years of his life, and he couldn't believe it. He loved West Virginia, hadn't seen it before, but he said, John Boy, these people really are blessed with water. He couldn't believe that there was just water running in streams all over the place in West Virginia. And it's not like that in other places. Water, potable water, clean water can be difficult to come by in other places, even in Florida, at least where it's not muddy and swampy. But I moved here because I wanted to be here, and I thought it was beautiful. I thought it was a way of life that I wanted to have. I read To Kill a Mockingbird about the time that I was in law school, or maybe read it again, and it was just inspired to live in a small town and raise my kids there, and to be a real small town trial lawyer that could do things like Atticus Finch did and be respected by people. And so that was my inspiration of moving to a small town. And people told me, you can't do that. You'll never earn a living there. And even after I was practicing in West Virginia and decided to go out on my own in this small town, they told me, you're not going to survive. And you know what? I proved them wrong. And really, the way I did it was because, I did the civil rights stuff. And so that was sort of a niche that went well beyond my little small town here. But I've wanted to give my kids that same experience, not the same experience as far as the racism and everything goes, because that's not the way it is here. But the small town life of where you can walk around, everybody knows everybody. You can walk, your kids can walk to the store and be safe, and also meet interesting characters and be part of a community. And so if you haven't read To Kill a Mockingbird, and it's not a political book really either way. It doesn't try to preach to you really. It is, I think, a accurately portrayed book of a rural Southern community and what it's really like to be a small town lawyer. And to not, by yourself, not have any help, face extraordinary odds, sometimes difficult cases. And I'm happy with the decision I made. But yeah, I feel lucky to still be here. And there are sacrifices that are made to be here. For instance, if you want to have your kid train jujitsu, you've got to do a lot of driving. Or if you want to play other sports, you got to do a lot of driving here. Or if you want to have a live video on YouTube, you have to deal with unstable internet. And it's just sort of the way it is here. Now, what I wanted to go into was, again, just to get back on track, I wanted people to be armed with the facts of science. Because when people say that, you don't believe in science, I believe in science, or you're not a virologist, all this sort of thing. I want people to be armed, to know what to say, because the fact is that these people don't believe in science. And this is scary because here's the fact. This has become a religion, a wokeism sort of thing, the maskism of a religion. They don't care anymore. They don't care whether masks work or they don't work. And that's scary. They don't care if they work. And they also don't care whether or not it's harming children, even their own children. They don't care because it's that important to them. And who would have guessed that would be the case even a year ago? Who would have guessed that would have been the case? I wouldn't have guessed that. It was just bizarre, the way this all turned out. But they have embraced masking, wearing masks to the exclusion of everything else, including things that actually might work. But the statistics now show that the mask mandates Widespread mask usage has done nothing, has done absolutely nothing. And in fact, I have a picture here somewhere that I saved. I saw today. I saved it from somewhere. Where is it? But it shows just the curve in West Virginia. Well, I lost it, but I'll bring it up here in a second. It shows the curve of positive cases in West Virginia, and it's the same curve that you see in every state and really every country. It's the curve that COVID-19 was taking, and it did its worst damage after the mask mandates and after widespread mask usage, and that is because the masks don't do anything. They didn't do anything, and I mean, if they did, then why was it spreading in nursing homes where people were wearing masks? The staff was all wearing masks. The residents were all being forced to wear masks, and yet it was spreading. People were catching it and dying. It's because the masks weren't stopping it. In fact, the science actually shows, if someone cares to know, that these particles are so small that they go right through or around the masks, and they float around in the air for hours. Therefore, if you're in an enclosed indoor space where somebody was breathing, and could be just like cigar smoke. I'm losing my cigar here, but where somebody was breathing, it's floating around in the air for hours or even days. So if I'm infected and I breathe it via a small aerosol, it could be floating around here for several days. So it doesn't matter if somebody stayed 6 feet away from me. They may have come in this room hours after I left it, and they still can inhale it into their lungs, which is how the infection happens. And that's how the worst infection happens, because according to the scientists, it goes deep into your lungs, and that's the worst, really sort of infection. All right, so I'm not a virologist or a doctor, but that's what they said, is that it's inhaled into the lungs, and little tiny micron particles like this are small enough to go deep enough into the lungs to cause, a worse category of infection. So here's where you can find the science. I put the link in the description if you're watching on YouTube. And so click the link and it'll take you to this page. Let me share it. Let's see. Share screen. All right. So there's the website, thecivilrightslawyer.com. This has, this has the science that proves that masks don't work, and that also forced mask usage is harming our children. So this is our next step here in West Virginia and in other states, is to defeat these mask mandates by saving really the most, well, I'd say there's two categories of very vulnerable people among us, our elderly and our children. But it's almost even worse for children, because they're in these public government schools. I'll say government schools. And even if the governor, such as in Texas, says, all right, well, we're going to get rid of the mask mandate, these left-wing school administrators and school boards are going to keep mask mandates in place. So this is going to be a continued forced usage of masks with our children, and they're going to suffer the consequences, even if the rest of us out in the regular world aren't having to wear them anymore. Not that we are, but here is the article: masks do nothing to stop the spread of COVID and are harming children. This all comes from Stephen Petty. And Stephen Petty, as I discussed on Monday, is the country's leading expert in the area of industrial hygiene. So he's an expert witness that has testified extensively, and I believe in over 400 cases, including in West Virginia, in hazardous particle cases. And that's things like Roundup or asbestos exposure. And so he, through those cases, long before COVID ever surfaced, he was an expert in PPE and personal protective equipment. He was an expert in masks and what works, what doesn't work. And this had to do with things like asbestos particles. Now, this can be applied to COVID. In COVID, the point is, has particles that are even smaller than those types of particles that have already been studied and already had expert witnesses testify for decades about in courts across this country. But for some reason, the media and the government did not turn to actual experts in exposure to hazardous particles, experts in masks. They turned to people like Dr. Fauci or other medical doctors who have received really no training in masks or exposure, who have not been able to testify or qualified to testify in court cases anywhere about what masks can limit exposure or prevent exposure to certain hazardous particles. So these experts in its entire field have been, for the most part, ignored. So and I didn't know this originally, and I discovered this when I was listening to the Conservative Review podcast by Daniel Horowitz. Let me zoom in here. And Daniel had Stephen Petty on. And he's since put me in touch with him. And he's agreed to serve as an expert witness in our next mask mandate challenge, which will challenge the forced wearing of masks on behalf of school children in government schools in West Virginia and hopefully in other states. So not only will Jim Justice, our governor, not be able to force us to wear masks, which I'll explain don't work for this purpose, but also the school boards and the school administrators will not be able to force our children to do likewise. So I explain in this article, and you can share this with your friends and family, what industrial hygiene is, who Dr. Petty is, what his credentials are. But here's the thing: there's 4 main points to exposure to these hazardous particles, and these are 5 points actually. I put 4 main points. I got to fix that. There's 5. Personal protective equipment is the least desirable way to protect people, and we didn't know that. We haven't been told that. 2, masks are not PPE. We haven't been told that. 3, scientific evidence suggests that COVID-19 particles are mostly small aerosols and not droplets, which would mean respirators rather than masks are needed to be used to protect your lungs. Therefore, that makes the 6-foot rule effectively meaningless. Smaller particles, and this is what I was saying, smaller particles are likely a greater cause of disease since they get past the PPE. And PPE refers to respirators, by the way, not surgical masks, and definitely not the designer cloth masks. And this is really the outrage here, that things do work. Things do work, but we need engineers, chemical engineers, exposure experts. We don't need Dr. Fauci. Because things can work. There are engineering solutions, dilution, and destruction. So all the money we've wasted sending it to illegal immigrants, sending it to foreign countries, sending it to blue state governors and mayors, all this money we've wasted giving, just basically welfare out to people, unemployment rather, to people, whether they needed it or not, whether they lost their job or not, whether they were lost any income or not. We've given everybody money, regardless of whether we need it. This money could have been used to actually buy some engineering controls that could have helped save some lives. So this is these are from Dr. Petty's materials, which he graciously emailed to me. And this is the upside down pyramid is the chart that shows what works and what doesn't work as far as exposure. So masks are not even on the chart, but respirators are at the very bottom. They're the least effective of things that work. Secondly, administrative controls. So limiting times in an exposed area. So if this room is exposed, if one can limit the amount of time in this room, then that's better even than wearing respirators. And then above that, you have the engineering controls of dilution or destruction or containment. So that's the chart of what works and what doesn't work. And yet we've been obsessed with PPE. Now, PPE is not even the same thing as masks. Take a look at this. So personal protective equipment. You have a half-face respirator here. I've used those in restoring antique log cabins and tearing down the old 19th century plaster. They fill up with dust very quickly. They're not great either. Then you have your N95 masks. So masks are not respirators. The terms are often conflated. So even N95 masks are insufficient. They're not even on the bottom of this pyramid. So masks versus PPE, despite what OSHA tells us, despite what they tell the public, even OSHA admits that masks are not protective. Just look on there. Surgical masks are not respirators and do not provide the same level of protection to workers as properly fitted respirators. Cloth face coverings are also not acceptable substitutes for respirators. But we don't hear that in the media. In fact, just yesterday, I was looking at all these local news articles, which I'm sure are regurgitated from their national counterparts, saying, why are these conspiracy theorists still out there that refuse to wear masks? And they're pontificating about why the conspiracy theorists are out there. And the irony behind all this is that they are the theorists. According to OSHA, surgical masks don't work. CDC says the same. If you actually look, masks do not provide the wearer with a reliable level of protection from inhaling smaller airborne particles, and it's not considered respiratory protection. Moreover, leakage occurs around the edge of the mask when the user inhales. So according to CDC, according to OSHA, masks really don't work, which you won't hear. They don't meet the respiratory protection standards even used by OSHA. So this is what it comes down to, droplets versus aerosols. We've been told that masks are going to protect against droplets. In reality, all the masks are protecting against is basically spitting in each other's faces. But what difference does that make if we're already exhaling these aerosols into the air that are so tiny they go through the masks and they float around for hours and days? Doesn't matter if you spit on each other's faces or spit in each other's mouths if you've already been inhaling the same air and exhaling the same infected COVID-19 air. So even if it stops the spit, it doesn't stop the aerosol. So what's the point? Masks don't work for small particles. Now, there is science behind this. The National Academy of Sciences press paper. This is from February of 2021. It found that the overwhelming proportion of what people were exhaling, what infected people were exhaling, were small respiratory droplets, i.e. aerosols, that were so small that the masks don't work. So the unit of measurement is microns, and that's what you see in this chart here. So aerosols are generally particles that are less than 5 microns in size, and that's that UM. It looks like a upside down H. UM. That's the micron symbol. So particles that are less than 5 microns are aerosols. Particles that are from 5 to 10 microns in size are the larger respiratory droplets. So and you can take a look at this science, but by far most of the particles that are being emitted, for instance, in a room, COVID particles emitted after somebody's infected, is by far aerosols, smaller, less than 5 microns in size, usually under 1 micron in size. So how big is a micron, or how small is it? A micron is 4,000 times smaller in area than a single human hair. That is tiny. 88.9 times smaller just in diameter from a single human hair. That's how small we're talking about here. And again, according to the National Press Sciences paper, people infected with COVID are emitting out of their mouth a majority of micron-sized, 5 micron and less sized particles. That is a size that is so small that masks are rendered basically useless. And that is, I mean, that's, you know, that is the sort of aha moment. That is what they've been keeping from us. And here's the point. They've been telling us that if it's larger respiratory droplets, it's falling to the ground within 5 feet. So if we social distance less than 6 feet, that it should keep us safe. But this just blows all of that out of the air. Because if the particle sizes are that small, look at this chart. This is in hours and days of the time, depending on the size of the particle. This is how long it would be in the air to fall from approximately mouth height, from 5 feet to the ground. So if it's basically a 0.09 size micron, just slightly less than 1 micron, we're talking about to fall 5 feet, 58 days. I mean, that's crazy. Even larger ones, even 5, the largest of the aerosols, 5 microns, then you're talking about 0.64 hours. Almost an hour that it is, even the larger ones, the larger aerosols, could take just to fall from your mouth to the ground. So what point is there in just staying 6 feet away from each other if you're all breathing in the same air? So the point is there are things that can work, but it's not social distancing and it's not masks. And people have been led to believe that they're safe if they wear a mask, that their grandmother is safe as long as they're wearing a mask around them. And they're not told the truth. And that really is outrageous, because how many people died because they thought they were safe with a mask and they actually weren't safe? So moving on, 3 points here. Aerosols, very small particles of less than 5 microns, can stay suspended in the air for hours to days. Since they're suspended for so long, they can actually accumulate in concentration in indoor air rather than dropping to the ground, as you assume. Again, this renders the 6-foot rule of social distancing useless. It also renders masks useless. And so these are big lies that we've been told. And the way that Dr. Petty explains this is, imagine the virus as a gnat flying through a wall made out of chain link fence, which also has open windows and doors, which represents the gaps around the edges of the mask. There's literally nothing stopping or restricting the free and open travel of the gnat through the wall. So it's February 15th, 2021. Almost a year since the beginning of the pandemic and the lockdown started. There are 13 scientists and physicians that no doomer could argue with as far as credentials, who wrote the CDC expressing concern, and wrote Dr. Fauci in the same letter, and wrote the White House expressing concern about the implications of these aerosols. So it's not just Dr. Petty. They wrote, it's been clear that transmission through the inhalation of these small aerosol particles is an important and significant mode of COVID-19 virus transmission. So we're told, just wear masks. Why can't you wear masks? But if these small aerosol particles are a significant manner that COVID-19 is spreading, then the masks are irrelevant. They went on that numerous studies have demonstrated that aerosols produced through breathing, talking, and singing are concentrated close to the infected person and can remain in the air and viable for long periods of time, travel long distances within a room, and sometimes even further. And even they noted in their letter that back in October that COVID-19 was, CDC recognized that COVID-19 was spread through inhalation of aerosols. Yet CDC continues to pretend that masks are the answer, that masks work. They continue to use outdated recommendations that they haven't changed, even after recognizing that aerosols are a substantive way, a substantial means of infection of COVID-19. So here's what can be done. And this is, again, the outrage, because this hasn't been done. Ventilation. The only thing that can help really is to be outside, and that's the best, to be outside. But if you have to be inside, and this is where there's been exposure, increased air ventilation systems to bring fresh air in. There are ways to do that. Ventilation. You can even crack open windows or doors, or meet outdoors when possible. But there's also technology that can be used. Needlepoint. I had never heard of this. Needlepoint ionization technology. There are actually companies that make this sort of stuff that you can put in the HVAC systems, in the fan units, that will kill viruses such as COVID-19. And I'm sure it's expensive. But we've taken out more money in loans in the past year than we took out as a country all the way back to the beginning. All the way back to 1776, even before the beginning. How many of these systems could we have bought, even if we're just going to put them in the schools or the nursing homes? There are all sorts. I mean, we're America. We could have come up with all sorts of ingenious solutions to bring ventilation in older buildings or where it's needed. But yet we've been obsessed with masks. So the CDC has finally begun to admit how small the COVID particle really is. They admit it. And I have the links here if you want to click on it. Again, it's at thecivilrightslawyer.com. Research shows that the particle size of the SARS-CoV-2 virus, that's COVID-19, that's the intelligent way to say it, is around 0.1 micrometer, micron. That's micron. It's around 1 micron. Okay, most of the respiratory droplets and particles exhaled by somebody who's infected during talking, singing, breathing, and coughing are less than 5 microns in size. This is from the CDC. And if they're less than 5 microns in size, that means they're aerosol. Remember the chart. 5 microns and less are aerosol. They're going right through PPE, which masks aren't even PPE. Or they're going around, because if you don't have a seal, remember, it's like a gnat flying it to a wall. Now, the wall is a chain link fence, but it has open windows and doors. So even if it wasn't a chain link fence, it'd just go right through the open window or open door, because they're not sealed. You would have to have a seal for that to make any difference. So if you can fit a single human hair around your mask, or even through your mask, depending on what kind of stupid mask you wear, then that's 4,000 times bigger. I mean, this is a teeny tiny little thing. Again, that could just be out here for days and days, just falling this small distance to the ground. The government has spread disinformation to people. And even if you try to correct it, they censor you. So just the other day, CDC came out with a statement that it was the CDC was warning against COVID theater, that there was all this theater going on. And of course, there has been theater, just like Dr. Fauci said originally that, oh, well, we don't need to wear masks. Oh, we do need to wear masks. And you have people like Biden who've been vaccinated, or people who have who are just extremely unlikely to get it. They have the antibodies, still wearing masks, not because they need to wear a mask or they think that they need to wear a mask, but for theater reasons, just to manipulate the people looking at them, to say, look at me, I'm wearing a mask, therefore you need to wear a mask. And that's all it is manipulation. But who's been left out of all of this stuff is the children. Like the story I told where I saw in Ohio the other day, where the family came out of the restaurant and they all took their masks off and gasped for air, laughing and joking with each other, walking to their car. No one thought to take the mask off the little tiny toddler girl stumbling along behind them. She can't even see where she's going. This is what we're doing to our children in schools. And it's not going to end. It's never going to end. But there's science out there, and I bring it up. It's right here that this sort of thing, the forced usage of masks for our kids, is not just pointless. It's actually dangerous. It's causing, it's causing harm to our kids. So here's some of the numbers. A German study, and again, I have it here. You can click on it. A German study of over 26,000 children showed that 68% of parents reported impairments in their children as a result of mask wearing, including the following side effects: 60% irritability, 53% headache, 50% difficulty concentrating, decreased happiness, 49%, malaise. I think that's just not wanting to do anything, acting lazy, 42%. But look at this: impaired learning, 38%, fatigue, 37%. This is a study of 26,000 children. That's science, people. You want science? Here's more of it. Before some of these propagandists realized that they would one day be propagandists for masks, 2010 paper from Harvard University observed that damage can be caused by exposing children to endless fear and anxiety. Ensuring that young children have a safe, secure environment in which to grow, learn, and develop healthy brains and bodies is not only good for children themselves, but also builds a strong foundation for a thriving and prosperous society. And that was written by the National Scientific Council on the Developing Child for Harvard University. They wrote, I quote, "Science shows that early exposure to circumstances that produce persistent fear and chronic anxiety can have lifelong consequences by disrupting the developing architecture of the brain." So, many of us knew that this is not good for kids. This can't be good. Covering their face, whether they want to or not, even though we don't think there's any real risk for kids. And this German study is just proof of that. But the real question is do any of these people care? Do they care, number one, whether or not masks actually work? Is that even the point for them? I don't think so, sadly. Secondly, do they care that it's harming kids? I don't think so. Okay, they used to love the WHO, the World Health Organization. Well, click this link. You can read it for yourself. The World Health Organization lists the potential harms and disadvantages of mask use by healthy people. And again, that's the point here, is we're talking about something we've never done in the history of our country, is force healthy people to be quarantined or locked down or wear a mask. Now, we did do that to some extent during the Spanish flu in some localities, and it was a disaster. But that's for another video. But these are just according to the WHO, not according to me. These are the potential harms and disadvantages of mask use by healthy people. Potential increased, and I've observed this, potential increased risk of self-contamination due to the manipulation of a face mask and subsequently touching of the eyes with contaminated hands. So people, are constantly touching their masks. And if we're talking about children, they're really bad. They're not going to be wearing the masks correctly anyways. They're going to be adjusting them constantly because they're uncomfortable. They can't breathe. And so it's going to have, according to the law of unintended consequences, it's going to actually make things worse because there's going to be more touching of the hands, potentially contaminated hands, to the face, eyes, mouth, all that stuff. Again, potential self-contamination if non-medical masks are not changed out when wet or soiled, which can create favorable conditions for microorganisms to amplify. So what are people doing with their masks? They're hanging it on their rearview mirror, or they're hanging it on something in their car. And who knows how humid it might be in their car, depending on the location, or how dirty that mask might be, or how many times it may have been used. Again, unintended consequences, making things worse, bringing different, even other non-COVID bacteria into the body where they wouldn't otherwise be there. And children are always going to be worse about that. They'd probably take the mask right off the ground if they found it and put it on, if they're told to do it, if they're told they have to have a mask. And as the German study showed, potential headaches, breathing difficulties, depending on the type of mask used, facial skin lesions, irritant dermatitis, worsening acne. And that's something I know from my days of playing football in high school and college. And there was not a whole lot you could do about it. If you had acne at all, it was going to get worse because you have, You have the helmet on and it's sweaty, and then you have the chin strap on every day, all day, every day. And that chin strap, where it's touching your face, the acne just gets worse and it gets aggravated. And this is important. Difficulty communicating clearly. A lot of people look at facial expressions and the movement of the mouth to understand what people are saying. Potential discomfort. And here's a big one, a false sense of security, leading to potentially lower adherence to other critical preventative measures, such as physical distancing and hand hygiene. And again, physical distancing, if you're talking about 6-foot rule, that's not going to make any difference indoors. Outside it could, definitely. Or physically distance yourself from any area where there's been exposure. But we've been given a false sense of security. Poor compliance with mask wearing, in particular by young children. Again, they're not going to do it. They're not going to do it properly anyways. Improper mask disposal. Here's a big one that my brother suffers from. Difficulty communicating for deaf persons who rely on lip reading. And the most vulnerable children among us who have developmental disabilities, learning disabilities, mental illness. What is this doing to them? And this has been, although our actual mask mandates, a lot of them have included so-called medical exceptions, those haven't panned out in reality. You haven't been able to even go into a store where masks are being required and be able to say, well, look, I have a medical exception. That's not accepted. You either have a mask on or you're not allowed to be in there. Children have been the same way, based on what I've heard. And what business is it anyways of having to tell anyone or explain to anyone who tries to put a mask on a kid or anyone else that they're developmentally challenged in some way, or that they have a mental illness, or that they have a medical disability of any sort or vulnerability. It's none of their damn business. And the government shouldn't be requiring us to even communicate these things. But that's where we've ended up. In elderly persons, with cognitive impairment. I mean, elderly people with Alzheimer's, what must their last days have been during 2020, during the reign of terror by these governors?